give the audio quality and all this stuff, even though I brought the wrong computer. So let's do it. Can I sing a little bit in Nanda Bihari? I feel
yeah.
I feel very much enlivened in the temple room. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Giridhari Gopijana Vallabha Giridhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Jaya Radha Murlidhar Radha Murlidhar Radhe Radha Murlidhar Gaurachandra 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 Jaya Gaurachandra 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 Jaya Gaurachandra Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Nitai Gaura Premanandi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 20, Text 37. Tam tayaktu kamam mamatam Tam tyaktu kamam mamatam Bhartustyag Vishankitam. Bhartustyag Vishankitam. Namanirvichanam tasya. Namanirvachanam tasya. Shlokamenam surajagu. Shlokam enam surajagu. Tam tyaktu kamam mamatam bhartu styaga vishankitam nama nirvachanam tasya shlokam enam surajagu. Tum, that newly born baby. Tyaktu kamam, who was trying to avoid. Mamatam, unto mamata. Bhartu tyaga vishankitam, very much afraid of being forsaken by her husband because of giving birth to an illegitimate son. Nama nirvichanam, a name-giving ceremony, or namakarna. Tasya, to the child. Shlokam, verse. Enam, this, Surya, the demigods, Jagu, enunciated. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Translation, Mamata very much feared being forsaken by her husband for giving birth to an illegitimate son, and therefore she considered giving up the child. But then the demigod solved the problem by enunciating a name for the child. Purport, according to Vedic scripture, whenever a child is born, there are some ceremonies known as Jatakarma and Namakarna, in which learned Brahmins, immediately after the birth of the child, make a horoscope according to astrological calculations. But the child to which Mamata gave birth was begotten by Brihaspati, irreligiously. For although Mamata was the wife of Uttaya, Brihaspati made her pregnant by force. Therefore, Brihaspati became Bharta. According to Vedic culture, a wife is considered the property of her husband, and a son born by illicit sex is called Dvaja. The common word still current in Hindu society for such a son is Dogla, which refers to a son not begotten by the husband of his mother. In such a situation, it is difficult to give the child a name according to proper regulative principles. Mamata, therefore, was perplexed, but the demigods gave the child the appropriate name, Bhardvaja, which indicated that the child born illegitimately should be maintained by both Mamata and Brihaspati. Omagani Timidandasya Ginanjanan Shlaka Chakshun Militamena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutare Shimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunnivari Paskita Deshatarane. Vanchakalpatarubhasya Kripa Sindhu Vevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna. Oh, thanks, Sid. Thanks for whoever made this beautiful garland. And Sid, while you're up, is it possible to turn the Prabhupada's chanting off? Not that we don't love Prabhupada's chanting, it's just, it pulls the attention for sure, mine. So, welcome everyone. Welcome to the virtual crew. Susan, Jamuna, Pat, Betty, Andrea, Kiko, Angel, good to see you. Rohini, good to see you. Welcome. Henry, Agape, Sundarananda, and Ananda Bihari, thank you. And to the in-person Braj Basis. Arjuna Prabhu, thank you for being here. There's some of the stuff that's going to come out is coming from Arjuna Prabhu, so I did prepare a little bit for this, so it's coming through him. Sid, good to see you. And Emily? Good to see you. Krunaguranga and Vasudeva are doing their due diligence, their duty, and lovingly and with affection, and it's just amazing to be here. So I'm very grateful to be here. And boy, we've gotten into some pretty interesting waters here. And I had to call a friend. I had to call a friend with this one, and I called Ganeshan. So Arjuna knows on certain days I go for drives. I go drive into Gainesville now that I live in Alachua, and then on the drive I always make a call because it's about 30 minutes. And it's a good time to connect. And so normally Arjuna fields the call, but this time I called Ganeshan because I said, Ganeshan, what am I supposed to talk about here? This is very tricky. And what's the point of all of this stuff? There's babies being born, there's forceful pregnancies, there's demigods jumping in, and then there's people like, how is this supposed to apply to our life? Or because the Bhagavatam is so beautiful that it's meant to awaken us to what's going on here. So we read in the purport that there's some scars that we have to do. So of course, when we just had a child, we had to learn an astrologer, do the chart for our child, little Jayabai. And you can read so much stuff about that. And then you get the name. And the name's a whole scene in and of itself. Because according to the time that somebody's born, there's certain syllables that are supposed to be enunciated during that time. And it's actually supposed to help the child. So it could be a cha, it could be a ga, it could be their name has to start with something like that, because that's that shows that we're aware that there's a higher order and we're allowing the personality to be in touch with that. So we don't think, we forget that we're in a really perfectly orchestrated situation because we want to control the external environment, but actually we're in a very benevolent situation to help us to go into our spiritual life. And astrology and these type of things are very good for reminding us of the subtle nuances. So you come to New York, and me and KGP were talking about this yesterday. You come to New York and you see a lot of faces. Anybody ever walk the street and see people's faces? It's absolutely amazing to see what's on people's faces. I walk the street, and if I'm lucky, I'll see a deer. And they have very gentle faces, or a cow. And it's a very gentle face to look at. But have you seen the New York faces? It's practically inconceivable, the energies that are happening in a big city like this. You see the faces, you see the desires, you see the hopes, you see the broken dreams, you see the tears, you see the whole thing. And we're very much immersed in that. So you come to New York, and one of the predominant drivers is, of course, it's sex, and it's also money, and earning and livelihood and all that stuff. So you get bewildered because you're in an atmosphere that's so driven by these material things. And so that's why I always, my head is bowed to all of your feet for staying in the fire, because the intensity of the city it's quite, it's palatable or palpable. So you have this ceremony that's going on, and they're trying to figure out, well, what are we going to name this child, and and how do we decide whose responsibility this is? Because we've just seen, or we're about to see, actually, the next verse, we're about to see both of them rejecting this child, which is just amazingly sad, right? You got the mother who says, I don't want to deal with this, mamata. And then you've got an amazing sage, Brihaspati, who, according to astrology, is Jupiter. So you've got an amazing sage who was overtaken by lust, and neither of them want to deal with this. Why? Does this even hit home for us? right? In the heavenly realm, because this is the higher planetary system, so Arjuna's taught me about this in different ways. It's a bit inconceivable for us, the level of enjoyment. We scrap around for a pizza. We get really happy about it, but the level of enjoyment it's so much greater in these higher, and also the level of the idea that of your honor and of your doing things right and all of that stuff, it's also so much greater. We mess up, big deal, right? But there it's a whole scene, especially if you have great position. But even in this world, right, as devotees, we build ourselves up in certain ways, and we follow the principles, and we do this, and this is who we are, and then we don't, and then we're crushed, and we think, oh God, what happened to me? I built my empire based off of the principle or whatever I'm supposed to be as a devotee, and then that facade sometimes will go away, and then you think, oh God, what happened to me? And it goes so deep, because then we become shamed, and then we've seen many times, I'm sure Arjuna's seen hundreds, if not thousands of times, where somebody goes through that and then they just walk away because the shame is so great. So here's these two incredibly powerful personalities who are feeling intense shame. And it's one of the most difficult emotions to deal with, isn't it? You got to deal with shame. So you don't want to deal with it. So you don't want to take responsibility for it. And this reminds me of the story in the Bible, the Adam and Eve story, where they have one thing to do, right? Have you heard this story before? They're in the garden and there's an apple there, and just don't eat that, and that's all. And they eat it, and then God comes down and goes to the husband, what are you doing? And all he has to say is, my bad. Shouldn't have ate it. But you know what he does? It's very similar to this. You know what he says? All he has to do is say, I'm sorry. That was my fault. I sinned, right? I went against what you asked of me. And that's all he has to do, is accept it and then move forward. But what does he say? He says, it was her fault. Right? He points the finger. He says, her fault. And she looks and she's like, it's his fault. So this is a very deep problem that we have, is taking responsibility. Let me take responsibility for what I've done. And if I take responsibility for what I've done, then things can be rearranged properly. But we don't want to do that, because if we take responsibility, then we have to actually look at, when we read some of these prayers of the acharyas, I'm lower than a worm in stool, I'm this, I'm full of lust, I'm full of pride, I'm full of greed, and you think, oh, not really. And especially me, I chant every morning. It's like, I'm not that bad. But then things get revealed, what's in the heart actually, over time. And then you just think, God, there's a lot of, this is not so good what's happening inside of here. Like, we cleanse the mirror of the heart and the mind, and we start to see what's actually in there. So all we have to do is take that responsibility, but then we start to move forward, and then that's honesty, and then we start to grow. And so all Brihaspati and all Mamata have to do at this point is they have to say, yeah, let me take responsibility, but they don't. Isn't that interesting? These are great personalities, so much greater than our little beings here on this little earthly planet, but they don't take responsibility. So what am I supposed to learn from this? And for me, looking up, especially doing astrology, Brihaspati is such a hero to me. Such a powerful personality. We're all influenced by his influence, but he and what does he fall to? Lust. So how great is lust? How great of a influence is that in our life? It's unbelievable, actually. And what is that lust? It's the desire to enjoy, right? It's the desire that I'm the controller. It's not that Mamata is not beautiful, right? And she's so beautiful, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem with him was he saw her as she's mine to enjoy, not just appreciating the beauty. She's so beautiful. What a beautiful person this is. Wow, Krishna's energy, or Krishna's, an expansion of this is amazing. But it's like, no, that's mine. And so then what happens is we get overtaken by that. And I'm not going to speak about it much longer, because I know when you sit on the Vyasa sign, it's very potent medicine. So I want to be very respectful to Namadev, to say, we're all one step away from being overtaken by that, because that's the nature of the enjoying spirit that we misdirect for some time. So I was talking to Ganesham about this, and we also started to talk about how in this, they're really trying to get rid of this little boy. And in our culture, we just have abortions, right? Like that's like a big thing. And people get into big debates about, I think there was a bill that was just passed in Texas or something, that you're not allowed to have one. And there's big fights going on, and there's all kinds of stuff. And Ganesham was relaying that in one room conversation, Prabhupada was asked about something, and he started to cry. Tears were flowing, actually. How, this is a mother. Could she do that? This is their duty, and we're so disconnected from this, but we don't want to deal with the responsibility that's there. So with sex, it's so interesting, because this is illicit sex, but I remember having a realization one time. I said, what if every time in this world that somebody performed that act, they had a baby, and that they had to take care of that baby until they were 18 to 20 years old? What would happen then? Right? Like every time, like you couldn't get away with it. Every time you had to take care of a child for its whole life. The consciousness would switch, wouldn't it? Because the act itself is so pleasurable, the consciousness would shift because of the responsibility factor. And so we're always that's why it's so mysterious, because we think we get away with things, but actually we're asked to take more and more responsibility. So we were talking about it, and then we were talking about how painful it can be to see some of these, like what we're reading right now. How does this fit in? Because we're almost at the 10th canto. We're almost there. It's like, how does this fit in? They're getting rid of babies. Babies are coming. Babies come. One's coming this way. One's coming that way. Oh, forget about it. I don't want to deal with this. Will you deal with this? And then there's and then a great baby's born, and they become a king, like we're hearing about Miraj Bhatt. And then another one comes, and that's like a demon, and it just becomes this whole thing. And when we were talking, it was becoming more and more clear how beautiful Krishna's birth is then. Because this is all, it's not dirty, but it's a little bit material in that sense, isn't it? Somebody looks at somebody, they forcibly impregnate them, it turns into a whole thing. It's all about I, me, mine. And then you have Krishna's birth, which is so beautiful, right? It's not a material birth. It's actually his birth from the heart. It's an exchange, right? Coming into Vasudeva and Devaki, and there's an exchange, and then he appears, right? It's not a, it's not a stirrup, and I don't know, do they still do stirrups at the hospital? It's not one of these, like, now it's a very intense place because it's in the prison, but it's also just so beautiful and so life-giving. And so when we start to hear that story after listening to all of this, oh gosh, it's just such a pleasing, it's like clean water coming down. You start to hear of this personality that we're all longing for, really, in such a beautiful way, how his birth took place, and how the hearts were all calling for this personality. And then he comes, and he descends to this world. So these were a few different thoughts that I had on these verses, because it's really interesting to look at these and see, well, where is this leading us? Right? Where is this taking us to? And my sense was that this is taking us to, and we're going to hear next verse, we're going to hear Brihaspati and Mamata fighting about this. But the idea of taking responsibility for whatever action it is that we do, the idea of being very careful, cautious when it comes to kama and lust, and then the idea that we're being set up. If we go into these and we don't just read through them really quick, we're being set up for longing to hear of a birth and a personality that is, because this is all the history, this is all the dynasty, this is all this. Well, when does he come and how does he appear? And then that, as we read in the Bhagavad Gita, understanding his appearance is an important part of our spiritual life, because it will lift us out of this material atmosphere. So any thoughts, questions, or reflections on any of that? There you go. Welcome. Anybody on the online or in person? Sid?
One thing that struck me is that we always talk, we hear so much phrase, birth, death, disease, and old age. And we always, coming to these personally, I always consider like, oh, I would not want to take birth again because I want to avoid the death, disease, and old age. But like the birth itself is also like a very complicated thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really consider like how like it's really a struggle because there's so much involved.
Yeah, and
Giridhari Prabhu, can you repeat what Sid Prabhu just said?
yeah, Sid was saying that we hear about birth, death, old age, and disease, and he was saying that, you know, in his mind he's thinking sometimes, I don't want to take birth again because I don't want to deal with old age, disease, and all of these things. But birth is actually really hard. You know, the birth itself, there's so much struggle, and the birthing process is a whole scene in and of itself too. Right? I mean, most of the time, as we say, especially in the Western culture, it's very unconscious. Oh yeah, we're pregnant. How'd you get pregnant? I don't know. It was a good weekend, right? It's like, it just happens. But the actual, if you're thinking about having a child, and sometimes somebody is infertile or something is going, it is an absolute anxiety for the parents. And then what to speak of what we read in the Bhagavatam about the child calling out, because it's such a painful experience for birth, you know, calling out, remembering their last 100 births and just being in so much, I will not forget you, my Lord. You know, it's an amazing experience. Thank you for saying that, Sid. Anything else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hi, Haribol. Thank you for such a wonderful class. I really liked some of the points you made. I have a question. Are there any nuances within our standards about abortion, like in different cases?
Are there any what?
Nuances. Like,
Nuances.
Is it just a hard no in all scenarios, or is there space for exceptions?
Who is that?
This is agape, Prabhu.
Oh, that's enough.
Yeah. So that's Arjun was asking. It's a good question, in the sense that the idea, we were just hearing the other day, we had Bhakti Lata over in Ganesham, and Bhakti was speaking about the principle of guru, and she was saying that she grew up a devotee, and she's in New Vrindavan, and she was 7 years old, and they had a birthday party. And so they thought that they were going to be rebellious and stay up till Mangal Arati. You know, I mean, how pious can you possibly be if you're going to stay up all night to make it to Mangal Arati? So anyway, so they had their little girl group, and they're 7 and 8 year olds, and they stay up all night, but then it's maybe 3:30 in the morning. Mangal Arati starts at 4:30 there, and they sneak with their flashlights to the temple, and then they get in there. But Mangalarti isn't going on because they don't have, this is obviously many years ago, so it's not, they don't have their well. And so they see a Roth cart and they fall asleep on the Roth cart. It's like, that's how rebellious they were. So they fall asleep on the Roth cart, and then they sleep through Mangalarti, of course, because you're 7 or 8 and you can sleep through big kirtans. And she said, but then at some point she woke up, and during class, and they were forced to go to class. So when you're that age, you don't want to listen to anybody. And so she's just laying there, she said, and then she said, and she still remembers it to this day. She's 7 years old. She said, and I just started listening. I didn't know who was giving class, but I thought, oh, for the first time in her life, she heard something that was really nice. Because the person who was on the Vyasasan was speaking about taking care of Tulsi, and how some devotee had figured out how to not kill the bugs that come on Tulsi, or the ants or something like that. And she said it really made a lot of sense to her, like respecting all life. And oh, that's really thoughtful that somebody was seeing the soul in every living being. And it just really hit her heart. And she was saying that was the first time she heard her spiritual master speak. I mean, heard it. Might not have been the first time, but the first time that she heard an eternal message. And she said, to this day, it's a driving force. Well, how do I see the living soul in every living being? So to your question, Agape, the idea of abortion, of course, in our modern culture is very, it's dicey. It's one of these things you don't even want to get into because it's so political, or it can get there's so many strong opinions. But when you see it from the perspective of every living being is sacred, and the other thing that happens here in this story is you see that there's a destiny that's unfolding. Like this Bhardvaj, right? Who's this personality who's in the higher planetary systems rejected and then goes and takes birth in the Earth planet to the greatest king? You see what I'm saying? There's a destiny that's there that it's playing out. There's something always higher going on. So if somebody's pregnant in so many different situations and all that stuff, the idea that life is sacred is always, that's the main principle. But then how does that play out? It's hard because you got to deal with each situation, Agape. Does that make sense? You can't, there's not a blanket statement with any of that stuff. But the principle of life being sacred is it's the foundation that we build our consciousness off of, because we have to honor every living being. And we have to honor that there's a greater plan that's happening, for sure. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you, Prabhu. And I apologize for asking such a hot topic question.
Hey, no problem. No problem. We have to ask these questions. Any other thoughts or questions? Emily?
Well, I suppose I'll say it, but I know this is really a topic which is best like when you have hours and you smoke and you can really dissect. But we're talking about taking responsibility, and I suppose I understand that when things come your way, even when it's out of your control, you may still have to take responsibility for that. So in the scenario of Mamata, this was what seems to be completely forced on her. So what does it look like, excuse me, for her to take responsibility versus Grihaspati, where like he should do more than be responsible, but like so much, work. But for her, now she has to also deal with like this was forced on her.
Yeah, and then her whole reputation goes down the drain, right? Because it's what's going on. It's interesting because the demigods in this situation are saying, well, we figured it out. Like the name is Bhardvaj. It means him and her take responsibility because the child came through you. So in her case, it looks like, and this is one of the main things that happens is attachment and aversion, right? So we're attached to things means I want something that's not coming, or we're averse to things is I don't want that and it's coming. Does that make sense? So it's one of our main problems is because I'm attached, I want that and it's not happening. I want to be married. I want to be, rich and famous. I want to be whatever it is, and I can't do it. So then I get an anxiety, or I'm averse to something means, is this happening to me again? Is this happening again? What? This just shouldn't come. So in this situation, what we're seeing is something's coming that doesn't, to her, through her, it doesn't make sense. We can't figure out how it's happening. I mean, you can see what happened, but what are the lifetimes behind it? Well, how did Brihaspati be inspired? Like, how does it even play out? And then taking responsibility for it. Well, it happened, right? Like, now I just have to own that. And my reputation or whatever it is like that, she's averse to that. Her reputation's going to go down and all of those things. But the purification is there, and that's what we always have to try to see is, well, what is the purification? Because where's my happiness really? So how does she take responsibility? It's a great question. It's a really great question because we see this all the time. You see absentee fathers, you see, and you see somebody who I can't even imagine a single mother in my life. Honest to God, I can't even fathom it. It's such an amazing yagya to do. So how does somebody do that? But you see sometimes, say you have a single mother, right? The potency and power that comes through that person is unbelievable. We look at our good friends, the Kishore Gopal and Ananta Gauranga, and their family, and this Mother Ekadasi. Who's she? So powerful. And what did she do? She took responsibility, and the Shakti and the empowerment that comes and the purification that comes and the purity that comes through that is it's otherworldly because she took responsibility. Does that make sense? And so that's where we have to look for that glimpse into, will come what may. And now let me try to line up with something higher. Is that helpful? Okay, thank you. Any last questions or comments? Angel?
Hare Krishna, Jai.
Hare Krishna. Good to see you.
I really appreciate how you just mentioned that because in life, there's so much that comes unexpected in this world, in Maya. And the only way that we can pacify ourselves or basically give permanency is to chant or remember God in every encounter, in every so that's the only thing that's permanent, and that's a way of pacifying us. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate you, Prabhu. Thank you for everything.
So Emily, you should just talk to Angel because she's also she's an shining example of that. So thank you, Angel.
Who's this angel?
Who's this angel? She's an angel. She's an angel. Arjun's asking, who's this angel? She's an angel. Angel is she was running around in the corporate world, right, Angel? She was running around in the corporate world making a lot of money at one point, and then things happened that she didn't want to have happen, but she took responsibility for them. And she came to yoga, and then she found Krishna, and she just stays close to his feet. And that's what she does. So thank you, Angel. And she takes care of a beautiful boy too. So, thank you. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ananda Bihari, for asking me. We'll close a little bit early and hope to see you all soon. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki